Welcome back to another episode of the Thinking Man podcast. These are one of my mini episodes I do on the weekend to really hone in and focus on something that I have seen in my work that I'm working with men. And today's no different. This thing about being super picky and critical when dating. And actually, before I jump into this topic and go into like the pain and why it happens and why it's important to deal with and what you can do about it, I've got a workshop. It's called Overcoming Avoidance. 4 proven techniques to really help men get over avoidance. I'm going to talk about how to feel your feelings, the importance of doing so. I'm going to talk about why your avoidance comes up, as well as, ways to communicate better in your relationship. I'm going to show you a particular tool to do that, which I found has been life-changing for me, and a few other bits and pieces, right? It's a free workshop. The link is in the bio. It's going to be, if you're listening to it on Sunday, it's going to be free all the way to the end. So yeah, come along. You're going to learn something, right? And you get to meet me as well. And you get to, ask a question or two. But back to the topic. So being picky and critical is something I see a lot of men, and a lot of the men that come to me is this like, oh, they can never find anyone that's good enough. They're always finding something that's wrong with women that they meet. It's a really common thing. Happens to women as well, right? And the biggest issue that they're suffering from is this fear of making the wrong choice, fear of making a mistake, right? It's this actual kind of hyper focus on the pain that will be caused if they make a mistake, or the made up pain that will be caused if they make a mistake, right? So men will be like, oh, if I choose the wrong woman, then that will destroy my life, right? Or if I go on a date and it doesn't go well, then it can come up with all sorts of fantastical problems that will be caused, right? And will go on in their lives. And it's this kind of like fearful, it's like a negative bias, and it's like projecting that negative bias into the future. So it becomes very painful to date. So you become very picky and critical to protect yourself from having that. Another thing also is a really low self-esteem is another reason, right? So it's like if we're really picky, and it's low self-esteem combined with fear of rejection. If I'm really picky and critical, then I'm never going to be rejected because I'm always rejecting people first, and no one ever gets to see my low self-esteem, right? And my low self-esteem doesn't have to be like put out there in the world. This is something, again, I see really common in men. They come often with sometimes big bravado or really high expectations of the women they want, and deep down there's a lot of fear about their low self-esteem and them not being good enough, or the fear of rejection, or the fear of kind of obligation and so forth, right? Another thing that really kind of heightens this is this perfectionism, right? Perfectionism and control, this need to kind of control outcomes and have outcomes be exactly as the way they want them to be. Newsflash, dating is absolute chaos. And the reason it's chaos isn't because dating is inherently bad or anything like that. It's chaos is because there's multiple human beings involved with all their feelings and emotions, all their wounding and trauma, all the stories that they're telling themselves, their self-esteem, their confidence, their lack of, their ability to date, their lack of, the ability to communicate, their lack of, and just them having good and bad days, which makes dating chaotic because there's just so many variables. And not necessarily like anything else in life isn't chaotic, because everything's kind of chaotic, right? If you follow football, like myself, you also see that football's chaotic as well, right? There's a chaos to it, and you cannot control that chaos. You can ride the waves and surf the waves of the chaos, but you cannot control it. And if you want to control it, you're going to get really stressed about dating. And I guess this is what this pickiness and criticalness also speaks into. Another thing I see a lot with men is they follow a lot of content that has primed them to believe that like all women are the same, and usually negative. Like all women just want to take my money, all women want to trap me into having babies, and these sorts of things that I blame Red Pill. I follow an account on Instagram that's Red Pill, and they talk a lot about this stuff, and it's wild. They're always just talking about women that cheat on their husbands and blah blah blah. So they paint a very negative picture of dating, of relationships. And, I used to be the same. I used to have a really, really negative opinion of relationships. And it was just my own projection, like some of it was experience. But what I wasn't taking responsibility for was that those experiences were caused by my own behavior. I thought it was the women and, them being quote unquote crazy, overly emotional, too clingy and all those things. But in fact, when I started to look, it was my own behavior that would make them overly emotional. Why? Because I was lying and I was hiding things, and I was suppressing my emotions, and I was belittling their emotions, and I was doing all manner of other things, right, that made them anxious and stressed and emotional in my presence. That's just to say the least. It was inconsistent in my behavior. I didn't show love and affection. Like, often we'll look at, our relationships and go, God, she was so X, Y, and Z, but we don't stop and go, we don't have the self-awareness. And this is a big problem. If you don't have the self-awareness to go, how did my behavior cause her behavior? Right? If I'm the root cause of everything that occurs in my life, how am I creating my relationship to be like this? It's a really important thing to ask yourself, right? Because if you don't, you're just going to, always think it's all women are the same, when actually you are the common denominator in your life. And if you don't do anything about it, then obviously you'll keep having the same experience. You might have slight variations. You might be lucky from time to time you meet a woman who puts up with your shit and really reflects to you honestly and to change. But if you don't listen, then nothing will change. And trust me, I've worked with a lot of men who have been in great relationships that they fucked up, and they come to me distressed, destroyed, that they want this relationship back. And they were just unable to see when in their relationship how bad their behavior was. Not all of it, but like the behavior that caused the detriment of the relationship. Another thing about the making mistakes that I mentioned earlier is about the meaning, like the meaning we attach. Like if I make a mistake, and this kind of goes hand in hand with low self-esteem. Like if I drop a whole pack of eggs on the floor, right? If I then do that, how I talk to myself afterwards will tell me so much about my self-esteem. Yeah. And you might meet people who are highly successful and their self-esteem is in the absolute toilet, right? They'll hide it because they've got a lot of success and proven ability, but you can see how they'll talk to themselves when they make mistakes. And they often then leak that out and talk to other people that way. It can be very harsh and debilitating the meaning and so forth to other people, right? So it's a really important thing to know on why you're so picky and critical, right? It can be really, really detrimental. And why is this important? Why is doing something about this important? Why you might be thinking, if I just be picky, right, eventually I might meet someone who's, good enough. Here's the problem. You will always find problems in people. Everybody, right? Even though most likely there's a few women you look back on, if your man listens to this, it's kind of aimed at men, since my podcast is for men. You might be a woman, but you can swap out the gender for yourself. There might be women you look back on and you're like, she was perfect, right? And this is something we do as men, especially men who are very picky, is that we have this rose-tinted glasses when we're going backwards, when we're looking back in the past at people that we dated or people we loved. So we often are forgetting a lot of the flaws that were there, and we have idolized them. Something called limerence. It's a really interesting phenomenon. We kind of become quite infatuated by someone who they are, right? There is no perfect people. You'll never meet someone who, if you've got the list of 100 things you want in someone, you won't find someone that has all 100. I don't believe anyone that tells me that, not because I don't believe in beautiful love and beautiful relationships. I'm a relationship coach, and I've coached enough people, men and women, in the last 4 or 5 years to know that there'll always be something missing in some way. It might be very small, but there's always going to be something missing. So it's acknowledge. So I'm just saying that, I'm losing my words here, that you're never going to find the perfect person, right? Because this idea that, if I find the near perfect person, then it'll be fine. It won't be, because you're still going to bring your same low self-esteem, your critical inner voice, your fear of making mistakes, and most likely your fear of vulnerability and intimacy, right, into that relationship, and you will cause the downfall of that relationship. It's not the person that you're trying to meet this stuff for. It's how you interact with people. Another thing is I see is important is because you're going to get stuck. You might already be stuck. You might be thinking, God, I haven't dated anyone seriously for years or months or decades even, right? You're stuck because the critical voice is in your head and it just whirls around, and you haven't really got any new input from outside, like someone to challenge that voice and challenge your opinions and challenge your actions so that you start taking new actions, make new decisions. Because we just, you're likely, if you're like most of the avoidant men I work with, which is very common, the pickiness and criticalness, they don't seek help, right? That's one of the biggest problems with avoidant men. It means they don't seek help, they don't get help, they don't shift and change. especially in the matters of love or the matters where their self-esteem is the lowest, which is often relationships. They get stuck, right? Another problem starts to occur is that you get really bitter about dating. You become really bitter and like angry and like dating shit. There's no good people around. Like there's no point dating. No one wants to. There's no good women and all this kind of tripe, basically, for want of a better word. If you're not sure what tripe is, please go Google it. And another reason why this is so important to heal and to do something about and to move past this pattern, right, is that you won't grow as a human being because you basically come up against a wall and you're stuck there. You're not moving past it because you're cycling usually through the same thinking, believing that, if I just meet the right person, instead of actually doing the real work to open up a bit, to be more, range of things. I'm going to go into these in a bit, like, open up your communication, looking at your emotional capacity, look at the stories that you tell yourself about love and dating, all these sorts of things. Or sometimes what I've seen with a lot of men, if they're really picky, is when they do meet a woman, sorry, I try not to use the phrase girl, that they really like, and it's really, what they want, they kind of regress into a kind of little boy almost, or a child, or like really nervous and really insecure because they've put her on a hierarchy above him and they don't feel good enough. Low self-esteem low self-esteem story kicks in, and then they can't be themselves, right? And they've just imagined that she's better than they are, right? So it's this kind of endless cycle, right? So what can we do about it? What can we do? Solutions. So I talked about challenging the stories, right? The perfectionism, the story around the mistakes and how that causes harm. It's a really important one, because if we don't challenge the stories in our mind, we continue to think the way we think. And if we continue to think the way we think, we'll continue to have the outcomes we've had in the past. It's a simple thing, right? I coach men, I coach some women as well. And ultimately, what I see makes the biggest shifts in people's lives. We talk about healing trauma and undoing wounds and all these sorts of things. The biggest shift and change for people is when they start to think differently about the same circumstances or things that are in front of them. They start having new information to have different thoughts and make different decisions. Sometimes that's slowing down, sometimes that's being in the body, sometimes that comes through, all these somatic works, practices and so forth. But ultimately, they have different thought processes. That's what changes. And how we get there, there's a lot of ways to get there, but that's one of the most important things, of challenging the thoughts that you have. Another, which I think is really important, I do this with a lot of men that I work with, who are very picky, and they have this kind of perfectionism and fear of making mistakes, is practicing gratitude for themselves and the things that they do and the things in their lives, and also focusing on the positive things. So when they meet someone, is for them to actively hold their attention on the positive attributes about the person they meet and they're meeting in front of them, right? This isn't to say to completely ignore the negative, because everyone's got negative things. But if we over focus on the negative, have an overly active negative bias, right? This is always common in picky people, right? They're negative about themselves. They see the negativity in themselves. They also see in other people. It means that they completely miss the positive things, or they downplay them to such a point and they overplay the negative things, right? Like it could be that you date someone and you look at their toes and you don't like their toes. And you find yourself just overly fixated on the toes, like thinking about them, looking at them. And you've forgotten that there's a whole other human being other than the toes, right? It's just an example, right? Because ultimately, if we just become fixated on this one thing, we completely basically reduce the person we're with down to that, or down to a few things. So it's like actively focus on the positive things about them. Like you might even find yourself complimenting and be like, I really love this about you, or saying it to yourself. And it really makes a difference over time. Right? It really does make a difference. It sounds so simple, but it's one of those simple practices we have to do in our lives over a long period of time to really make a difference. Another is just practicing making choices and taking risks, right? In dating as well. Like dating people that we wouldn't normally date. Dating people who we think there's got these things about them I don't really like. And again, you bring in the focus of the positive as well, and actively taking these risks and doing things differently and evaluating it like, oh, actually, I had an idea that what I didn't like about this person was the way they walked, and this would really annoy me. And then you date them a few times, and then you write, and you can kind of go, okay, how much does this annoy me now? Actually, the things about her that are great are far more important to me than the things I don't like. And actually really consciously bring that to your mind, right? Because when you have the power to do this, we have the power to like shift our mind consciously. So it's like, it really makes a difference when you do this. Another thing around making mistakes is it's important to make them, right? Because the more you make mistakes, the better your decision practice and processes will be. If you just avoid making decisions, right, or just saying and rejecting everybody and being really critical and being like a no all the time, you're actually not practicing like actual discernment within your decisions, right? And like embodied discernment, like where you actually feel like, is this person, like, do I like this person? What do I like about this person? What do I don't like about it? Instead of you just in your head and you're like activating your kind of automatic negativity. So it's like practicing that, like practicing feeling. It's a really simple thing, and it's not always easy to do for all of us. Some of us to do more practice than others, but practicing that, like feeling someone, like, making mistakes and trying things. I could add in here, like learning to really tune into your intuition, which is something I do with a lot of my clients and the men that I work with, because it's a really important piece to do, right? And that helps with decisions as well, taking responsibility and so forth. And I think that's it. I think that's enough for you today, because that's, it's a lot for you to take on and do. But this picky criticalness, like, you have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge that it's not the way that all people are, all women are, and acknowledge around the piece of self-esteem. I know a lot of people will go, oh yeah, but I think I'm really great. Maybe, but what are you trying to hide? What are you trying to shield yourself from? What are you trying to shield other people from about you that you don't want them to see, or you don't want them to know? It's often a really good question to ask. Like, what don't you want other people to know about you? And how does your pickiness or criticalness stop them from knowing those things about you? How are you afraid that they will judge you if they knew those things about you? So yeah, have a little journal over those. Feel free to send me your answers. As I said, I got a workshop. It's on the 13th in the evening, 7:30 UK time. There's a recording, so if you can't make it, that's cool. You can just pick up the recording, which I'll be sending out probably very soon after the workshop. And yeah, there's over 100 people signed up now, so feel free to add to those numbers. We look forward to seeing you. I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of the podcast listeners, sorry, not guests, there as well. So come along, bring a friend. But enough for me today. I'll say ciao.